Hello, you beautiful post-egoic souls, and welcome to the Space Time. My name is Gabriel Lugo, and here I talk from self to self. I've been thinking about the formation of the ego as the principle in which we have evolved as a society, as humankind has developed its way into a technological civilization, but most importantly, as the means by which we have created this new world, this dystopia in which we live. And combined with what I know, what we have known actually for thousands of years, but the way I connect them now starts to make a lot more sense. In this sense, I want to share in a sea of confusion that we live in right now, with the overabundance of information, the extremes that are expressed, the lack of truth that is disseminated, or misinformation as we call it, not in the sense that there is a specific truth that we can find, but rather that we are still a society that buys the truth from others. And this is what I call the lack of truth, because truth is found in the heart of every being. As I like to say, you cannot take from another universe your own experience. Your experience is from your own universe. And so this situation, this era that we're living right now, seems rather scary, but that depends, as usual, on our point of view. And this is what I want to share today as I connect these dots and make the distinctions appropriate to find that we are actually in a crossroads where our own consciousness and our perception is what is going to dictate how we proceed in our lives and the contribution that we make to the rest of the world as compassionate creature that we are at the core of our being. And this contribution very well may be what we call saving the world, which I would rather say aid in the liberation of the world, aid in the liberation of the constrictions of the personal minds. And that goes now into the ego, which is the main character that has been playing so far in our recorded history and down to now. So to begin with the ego, we need to find its formation as a way in which the absolute reality becomes distinct from itself, and it creates this illusion of separation. This illusion of separation is a needed step for unity to know itself, to experience itself. And so this separation goes onto the free will of the various entities that make up this apparent world of division, with however distinctions we want to make, from entities to atoms to planets and stars and the rest. But this process, this egoic process, has as a dynamic tension a possibility of returning to source, because there is never an actual separation, but an apparent separation, which is what we call the illusion, the ego, the separate self. And so there is always the return home, the path to liberation from this separation. However, over time in this planet, the exacerbation of the ego is what has been taking place. Now, this exacerbation was possible due to the naivety of the entities that populated our Earth, which has always been the case. There is always a few who are the privileged, but this privilege is granted by the vast majority that trust in this very few people to manage the economy, the geopolitical moves, and our conversations with other authorities. And as it is natural within the field of ego, those who like to polarize themselves to the extremes of separation will be rewarded with power. And this power is, of course, granted by the vast majority. And when you add to the equation the natural aspects of the ego, which is of control, of manipulation, of fear, of anxiety, then you begin to see how we create. And when I say we as a collective, I mean we all create this Frankenstein of parts that seem to be distinct from us, but is our own creation, because we contribute those parts. And those parts are now in the process of further separation and more control and more fear mongering, which is the perpetuation of itself. Now, while we can mention very specific entities and people across the whole narrative of history that we have, I want to keep it as an entity in and of itself, this illusion of separation, which is a collective energy that we have put into the planet, the group mentality, the collective consciousness. And so this power that we have given to this Frankenstein exacerbates as if it has its own life, its own consciousness. And that would be the consciousness of separation, or the illusion of separation through consciousness. And what this creates is the world that we live in right now, this massive entity, this massive cloud of smoke that looks fearsome and intimidating, is reaching the proportions in which it can no longer sustain itself, because the cloud of smoke has grown so large that the delineations that made it seem apparently as a solid being is beginning to dissipate, is beginning to be noticeable by the real entities, which is us, the collective, the togetherness that we are, is beginning to see it for what it is. It's beginning to see the space in between the molecules of this smoke. And as we see that, We no longer are prisoners of it. We no longer associate anything of authority to it. And this is what is happening in this era, in the moment that has been prophesied by all our major religions in its most esoteric teachings. Because what we know as the surface religion is only those teachings that are helpful for manipulation and control, because they have been taken, or rather we have put them up there in the cloud of smoke. And however, these esoteric teachings, which actually have been suppressed for thousands of years, are beginning to come out again in a more prominent way and show us that everything that was prophesied by the ancients is true. Ironically, we are at a point where we no longer believe in spirituality, religion, or magic, or anything that doesn't seem scientific, which is again a word that has been prostituted into the institution of provable phenomena, which is again another limitation that we have imposed on ourselves and put it up on the pedestal of the smoke entity. However, these esoteric teachings have told us about the age of Aquarius. In yogi traditions, they call it the end of the Kali Yuga, the end of one of these low consciousness cycles. In Greek, we have the word apocalypse, which literally means the revealing or the unveiling, the removal of a veil. And quite appropriately, this veil is depicted in the Law of One as the veil of forgetting, which is a condition that we have for what we call human interaction, human beingness. And this removal of the veil is possible only when we enter the discrete change in movement of the particles that we know, the photon, as we enter fourth density of consciousness, which is another way of saying the age of Aquarius, the end of the Kali Yuga, the apocalypse, and so many other cycles that we have known through history. But this entering into fourth density, what has in commonality with every other name for the end of the cycle, is the love, compassion, understanding, and underlying unity that is now seemingly emerging from the illusion of separation. But in wise understandings of reality, we have known that it has always been there. Otherwise, how can our ancients have foretold this if they didn't have access to this absolute reality that we are made of, and that clearly is emerging again, emerging now as an inevitability as we cross this threshold, shall we call it, on the new world that is now unveiled for seeing as it is. And so, going back to our planet and its current situation, what we see is that this has huge implications for the personal and the global being of what we call Gaia, our group consciousness, the tribe, the planet's mind. And this is a two-way, if we can call it that, because at the same time that this new reality is emerging, we are seeing that the illusory aspects in which we have built this society and culture and all the indoctrinations that we have been granted by our ancestors unwillingly from the point of the natural compassion and unity that we all have. But this heritage is now being shattered into its true nature, which is non-existence, the illusory part of the self. And what this means is that for a personal level, this you may be very familiar with because you have been affected by this destruction of the ego. This, rather, I would put it as the light of the morning that dissipates the shadows of the night and creates an intense light until we reach noon, the zenith of our planet's celestial body, and we no longer see shadows, we only see light. And so this dissipation of the shadows is what we see the death of the ego, which is a personal experience for all of us as we try to cling to the old notions of personality and beingness and so on. But what is being revealed is your true self, and how much we reject this true self is the resistance that we're going to create. As a result, we're going to find friction, and that friction is going to be unnecessary heat in our inner selves by resisting the reality that is being shone upon us. And so we all know this as the process of the dissolving of the ego, which, again, because of this is not, it's no longer a choice, it is a forced application of the nature of evolution of consciousness on us. It is not the choice of the tree to maintain the darkness of the night as the sun dawns. And this is what's happening at a personal level. It is an inevitable light that is showing us who we are. And as opposed to rejection and the unacceptance of the self, what we need to do is antonym, the acceptance of the self. And knowing that the self is not your ego personality, what you believe you are, all those beliefs, knowing that you are actually this true self, you can accept that and be liberated from the idea that you are a limited being. And this also takes to a much larger level, which is the global personality that we're seeing melt down now. And that would be the end of the dream of separation. This dream of separation is what has been always present in recorded history, where we have constructed this idea of a monetary system in which we gain from other people. Slavery in the past, physical slavery, slavery of labor, which was really the transition from physical ownership to the labor slavery that we saw from the Industrial Revolution all the way up to the technological revolution of the 20th century. And this slavery has transitioned into a monetary slavery, which is again dissolving because the new vibrations of the photon cannot be disturbed, cannot be changed by any action of a cloud of smoke. Any entity that seems to be separate from ourselves cannot sustain this in the world that we're living right now. This world didn't polarize to the illusory self, it polarized to the real self. And so the implications of this is the dissolving of this system, which at the very last moments where physical slavery has dissolved, labor slavery has dissolved, and monetary slavery is dissolving, it's trying its best, like a cornered animal, to maintain the slavery of information, which is the last step it can take into its own demise, trying to control the information, which is really what we're seeing right now. And it would be its last desperate move as it continues to dissipate into the nothingness that it really was, and absorbed actually by the action of unity of all of us in this path. And so that idea of gain, acquisition, and stealing is going away. However, this will be seen by many of us depending on our own makeup and our own directions. As I alluded before, this is a crossroad in which we have to pick, not as a main choice, but as a constant choice in our inward analysis, our introspective thinking, where we know that we are made up of two energies: the energy of contraction, tension, and what we call the illusory self, and the one of expansion and relaxation, where we simply accept things as they are and no longer fight for anything but our own truth. We become, as it were, messiahs of our own truth, independent of what everything else says, any institution, culture, religion, or even other people. And so this will be a rejoicing for the majority who picks in its highest percentage of beingness what we call in the law of one service to others, which I prefer to say simply unity. If my thoughts are guided towards unity, then if the vast majority of my thoughts are in unity, then I will rejoice in the changes to come. But on the other hand, as we live in a dualistic environment still, there will be those who will be presented with this reality and will react with terror, fear, and anxiety, because they still want to play the game that is no longer feasible to sustain because the cloud of smoke is being revealed for what it is. And in this process, the terror of losing, the fear of dissolving, those ideals and those American dreams that people had and that are no longer sustainable will cause a lot of panic and pandemonium in our society. And the potential work, contribution that those of us who are on the positive path can create is that solace, that oasis for these castaway people of the system to find the same joy that we find in these new times. There is an inevitable change. This inevitable change is the transcendence of ego, as it's no longer useful. This is the end times of the ego. This is the end times of third density mentality. This is the end time of the control and manipulation over others for personal gain. And there will be a lot of struggle. This will manifest as a lot of turmoil in our brothers and sisters. But it is a necessary evil that we need to go through. And those of us upon the loving path, the compassionate path, are simply here to lend a hand to those who are seeking our hand and not to impose it on anybody. This is, of course, the time for meditation. Meditation is no longer a choice, it seems. Meditation is a necessity for anybody in the world, but most importantly, for those of us who are seeking the natural resources that are not found anymore because they're exhausted out there in the external world, but the inward self that has infinite resources for us to bring the beauty of the world out, the inner world out. And so the allure, the charming part of this change is the possibility of bringing from the inside out, as it were, the beauty of infinity for others to also enjoy with us. So, while there's a lot more to say about this topic, this is all I have today to share as I was ruminating on these thoughts, and I wanted to bring it up to share with the world, with you, and hopefully to enhance a little bit more your model of reality as we live these new times that are inevitable. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.